Last week, our special guest, Dhanadhar Swami, took us deep into the section that we're exploring here in the second chapter. We spoke about the role of attachment, both positive and negative, in spiritual life. We spoke a little bit about the psychology of illusion, how it is that we come to be in a condition of forgetfulness of our eternal identity and identify with a temporary material condition known as a temporary material mind and body. And we also spoke about equanimity, being equipoised in both happiness and distress, and how progress along the path of spiritual life actually helps us to remain steady in our state of mind, not in any artificial way, but in an authentic way, so that the turbulence of the world and the turbulence of our lives and the turbulence of our minds don't rock our boat in quite the same way as when we are attached to material life and our material conceptions. Now, if you missed last week, all of these webinars are archived, so you can go back and watch any one or catch up from the beginning all the way up to this one. And you will receive an email tomorrow letting you know when this recording has been posted, and you will have access to it. Tonight, we'll be covering verses 16 through 30 in chapter 2, and these verses are concerned with discernment, invincibility, and empowerment. What we'll be talking about is, first, Sankhya philosophy. Krishna is explaining to Arjuna the distinction between spirit and matter, which is the fundamental distinction of Sankhya, which literally means enumeration. So this first portion, from a philosophical standpoint, provides the foundation, the basis for the rest of the philosophy that is spoken, as well as the sociology, the metaphysics, etc., all based on this idea of enumeration. So we're going to go a little deeper into that in this portion. We'll also talk about the invincibility that we all share, the invincible Atman, the true nature of the self as being eternal and therefore indestructible. And finally, we'll talk about what does that mean for us? How does that translate into something that we can use, that matters in our lives? So, in the previous set of verses, Krishna uses an example to illustrate how one changes bodies. He specifically says, as in one life, one moves from childhood to youth to old age. Similarly, a living conscious being will change bodies again at the time of death. And someone who understands what's happening, that death simply means to change one's body, is not bewildered by such a change. So Krishna is explaining these ideas to Arjuna by use of an analogy. Just as one changes one's body during the course of one's life, one changes one's body at death. So here's an example. Here's a nice little kid with the beginnings of probably bad posture. And you can tell by looking at the background that this photo was taken some time ago. I'm betting, about 60 years ago or so. The cars kind of give it away. The quality of the photograph gives it away. And this person is still here. Trust me, I know. But that body that he was in 60 years ago or so no longer exists. There are still some people who remember this young man and still think of that person as being the same person who was once in this little child body and is now in this well, older body. So the bodies come and go. The person remains the same. And it is the same principle that just as this body no longer exists, this one in the photo, and the person who was in that body is now in this body. Similarly, when I'm obliged to leave this body altogether, I will get a new body. At least that's how the philosophy goes. And we begin, therefore, with Sankhya philosophy. The enumeration and discernment of elements. Now, Sankhya philosophy explains how things happen, not why things happen. The best example I can think of is the question, why is the sky blue? If you do a Google search on this question, why is the sky blue? The very first thing that will pop up is an explanation of the atmosphere and the particles in the atmosphere and the wavelength of the light spectrum and how, because certain aspects of the spectrum have longer wavelengths and bounce off the particles in just a certain way, then that's why the sky is blue, because the color blue of the full spectrum somehow or other shows up in the atmosphere based on how wavelengths of light and particles of atmospheric stuff work. Except for one thing. That's not why the sky is blue. That's how the sky is blue. That's the mechanics of light and our atmosphere. Why is the sky blue, though? That's an entirely different question. So, just so we have an understanding of what Sankhya philosophy's function is, it's the function of explaining how things work, not necessarily why they work that way. That's a different area of philosophy. And Krishna will get into this area of philosophy in due course. The principle, discernment, the most important discernment, is the one that we are concerned with here, the discernment between spirit and matter. The Yoga Sutras, by the way, also start with this same assumption that there is a distinction between the self, who seeks to reside in its true nature by stilling the mind, and the mind itself, the mind and the body. So in yoga, the situation is not one of a mind-body dichotomy, but rather it's the relationship between the self and the combination of the mind and body, both of which are understood to be in the category of matter. Now, the mind and its partners, the intelligence and the ego, are subtle elements of matter, but from the standpoint of yoga philosophy, they're still considered matter, and therefore temporary or malleable, and not us. So we are not these bodies, nor are we our thoughts. So here's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to read the verses from this section that deal with Sankhya philosophy, and then we're going to go back and go through some of the details. We will also go back and chant one of these verses. So here we go. These are verses 16 through 30 in chapter 2. I'm backtracking just a little bit because last week we didn't cover these first two verses. Here we go. That which has no endurance does not truly exist, whereas that which is eternal never undergoes change. Seers of the truth have reached this conclusion by studying the nature of both. That consciousness, which is present throughout the entire body, you should know to be imperishable, No one can bring destruction to that which is indestructible. It is said that the body, inhabited by the eternal, indestructible, and immeasurable soul, will surely perish. Therefore fight, O descendant of Bharat. Neither one who thinks of the self as a slayer, nor one who thinks that the self can be slain understands. The self neither slays nor slays. The self neither slays not, nor is slain. The soul is never born and never dies, has never come into being, and shall never cease to be. Unborn, eternal, everlasting, and primeval, the self is not slain when the body is slain. O Partha, Arjuna, how can one cause the death of another when one knows that the self is indestructible, eternal, unborn, and everlasting? Whom does such a person slay? As a person relinquishes old and worn-out garments in favor of new ones, the embodied soul similarly acquires a new material body after abandoning the old and inoperable one. The soul cannot be dismembered by weapons, burned by fire, moistened by water, or withered by the wind. Indivisible, inflammable, insoluble, and unwitherable, know for sure that souls are eternal, changeless, stationary, and present everywhere. It is said that the self is invisible, inconceivable, and unchangeable. Understanding the nature of the self, you should not lament for the body. If, on the other hand, you believe that souls, manifestations of consciousness, are ever being born and at the time of death forever cease to be, you still have no cause for lamentation, O mighty armed Arjuna. Death is certain for all who are born, and all who die are certain to take birth again. Therefore, you should not lament that which is inevitable. All created beings are unmanifested beginning, become manifest during their middle stage, and in the end return to being unmanifest, O Bharat, Arjuna. So what cause is there for lamentation? So Krishna comes full circle. He begins this section by saying, Arjuna, you're speaking as if you know what you're talking about. But if you were truly wise, you would not lament, because the wise lament neither for the living nor the dead. So here's where Krishna wraps up this portion of his argument. No cause for lamentation, because it is simply not possible to kill the self within the body. It is only the body that will perish, and the end of the body, one way or another, is inevitable. And a wise person understands this and is not disturbed by this sequence of events. Are there any questions about the text itself, about this particular portion of the text? If you have a question, go ahead and type it in. One of the interesting things I find about this portion of the text is how many both different descriptions of the self and also the repetition of the attributes of the self Krishna offers us. One word in particular that stands out is immeasurable. And one wonders, well, does that mean it's immeasurably big and there's one enormous self that is everywhere? Or is it immeasurably small and there are innumerable selves everywhere to be found? So I'll look for your questions as they come up. Please feel free to ask. This is a chart that has a little bit of something for everyone. This is a chart of the human form laid out in chakras that are associated with, on the left side, the koshas, the different layers of coverings of the self, and on the right side, the different modes of material nature. We're going to get into these qualities or modes of material nature in detail later in the Bhagavad-gita. Each of these colored rings is associated with a different kosha or covering, as listed on the left, and correspond to an intersection with a chakra. From the standpoint of what this has to do with Sankhya philosophy, this actually describes the process of creation, or how we come to enter a physical body. So we start from the top down. We've heard a description of the spiritual being who is eternal and invincible. And this would be represented in this top chakra, the Sahasrara chakra, where one experiences pure consciousness through spiritual senses, or in other words, a spiritual body. As one enters into the material realm, as one comes in contact with material nature, one enters first the area of perception, the vehicle of perception, the mind, the intelligence, and the ego, indicated in the astral senses that are found in the Agya chakra, or your third eye chakra. And this is associated, or is kind of a bridge between your spiritual senses and your bliss body, your Anandamaya kosha. The first element in the material world, beyond the very subtle elements of mind, intelligence, and ego, is ether, through which sound travels. So the sensation of sound is associated with the element ether. And your throat chakra is associated with this element, and your throat chakra bridges your bliss body and your knowledge body, the faculty of perception. The next element is air, and that gives rise to the sensation of touch. Associated with your heart chakra, it bridges your knowledge body with your psychological and emotional body. The next element, fire, gives rise to the sensation of sight, associated with your Manipura chakra and your upper abdomen. It bridges your psychological body and your energetic body. The next element, water, gives rise to the sensation of taste, and it's associated with your lower abdominal chakra, Svadhisthana, and bridges your energetic body and your what is known as your food body, which is your external body made of, flesh and blood and bones and muscles and that sort of thing. Body that is made of food. Then your last chakra is associated with the final element, earth, which gives rise to the sensation of smell, or the sense of smell. And you'll notice that when we get to the earth, we find that all of these different sensations are contained. So with each progressive evolution of the development of matter, whichever sensation was contained in the preceding one is also contained in the next one, and it becomes cumulative. This is essentially a descending process into a material body. Yoga is the process, is the reverse engineering of the process of material creation. The whole idea of moving our life force up the chakras, controlling our life force to move the life, controlling the airs, the energy in our body, and being able to consciously, mechanically move our life force all the way back up through the chakras is essentially the mystic yoga process. And it reverse engineers our association with material nature. So this gives you a sense of how Sankhya philosophy relates to yoga and our yoga practice. So let me know if you have any questions about this explanation of Sankhya philosophy and its relationship to yoga. So here are your material elements. The gross material elements: earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Otherwise, in modern parlance, this would be known as solids, liquids, radiant energy, gases, and space. And then beyond that, now these 5 elements are the realm of science. The realm of modern science deals with this because you can measure it. This is all stuff that you can measure, quantify. Mind, intelligence, and ego, or false identity, are not so easily measurable because they're subtle. And as a result, psychologists have a hard time getting taken seriously as real scientists, or psychology as a hard science. Not the easiest thing. And that's one reason why you find that the study of psychology today, practically speaking, is all about the search for biological or sociological causes for psychological conditions in individuals and groups, because you can measure those things, whereas psyche cannot be measured. All right, let's get to a couple of your questions. First question from Neil: why is the mode of ignorance associated with the root chakra? Let's see if I can go, whoops, no. Go back. The element of surprise is gone. Okay, so I didn't really talk too much about these qualities of material nature on the right side of the chart, because Krishna hasn't spoken about them yet, and I am trying to wait until Krishna speaks about something before I speak about them. So this is either a spoiler alert or foreshadowing. Take your pick. The modes of material nature on the right: Shuddha Sattva, or pure goodness, transcendental goodness. It's a state of being beyond the influence of any material quality. The upper chakras are associated with Sattva Guna, or the quality of goodness or light. Rajaguna is associated from the heart down to the Svadhisthana chakra, associated with the mode of passion, action with intense attachment. And then Tamaguna, the mode of ignorance, your lower chakras. Okay, so earth, solid matter, inert, unconscious. The mode of ignorance is the mode of unconsciousness. And when you're dealing with solid unconscious matter, like the table my laptop is on, or the paper my notes are written on, the microphone I'm using to speak to you, these things are not conscious. The microphone is not self-aware. It doesn't know it's a microphone. Therefore, it is in the mode of ignorance. And it's made of a gross material element, metal. There's probably some plastic on it as well. Anyway, the point is that when we are completely convinced that we are this material body and we're extremely attached to this sense of identity, that's the influence of the mode of ignorance on us. So to the extent that we are concerned simply with primal needs of survival of the body, then our motivation is going to be in the mode of ignorance. Now that doesn't mean stupid. You can be very intelligent in the mode of ignorance. Ignorance is also characterized by intoxication. So if you're a really expert bartender and you can whip together the most amazing drinks, then that's intelligence in the mode of ignorance. Because intoxication itself, the bewilderment of the mind, I mean, let's face it, alcohol makes you stupid. It's really just a question of how stupid will you get, and that will be based on how much alcohol will you drink. Things that are destructive are also in the mode of ignorance. So the reason that the mode of ignorance is associated with the root chakra is not because the root chakra is necessarily in and of itself bad, but because it's associated with the most gross form of matter, which in and of itself is unconscious. Our food body is not conscious. My body looks like it's conscious because I'm in it and I'm active in doing things. But if I were to leave this body, then this would just be a limp lump of chemicals, and therefore in the mode of ignorance. Does that answer your question? While you're telling me whether or not I've successfully answered your question, Jill has asked, can you share the chart with us? This is the first time you've seen the koshas and chakras explained together. That's very reassuring, because the reason I made this chart is because I'd never seen the koshas and the chakras and the qualities of material nature explained together in one place. So Jill, thank you very much for validating my efforts to make this chart. And I will be happy to share this with you. Anyone who is watching now or listening or watching later, especially if you're listening since you can't see the chart, I will upload it and post a link to it in the follow-up newsletter that you receive to let you know when the recordings are ready to go. So Jill, you'll be able to download it from that link, and everyone else will be the beneficiary of your question because they will be able to download it as well. All right. Neil, good. If you're happy, I'm happy. All right. So we move on. So we're going to come back to verse 20, which I indicated earlier we were going to chant this evening. This is our verse that we're going to chant together. And this is going to be a slightly different cadence. Most of the verses in the Bhagavad-gita have 8 syllables per quarter verse. This one's got 11. It's like an amp that goes up to 11. And therefore, the cadence will be a little bit different this time. So here we go. I chant, you chant back. Na jayate mriyate va kadachin. Nayam bhutva bhavita vana bhuyaha. Ajo nitya shasvato yam purano. Na hanyate hanyamane sharire. Our translation, once again, the soul is never born and never dies. Never, has never come into being and shall never cease to be. Unborn, eternal, everlasting, and primeval, self is not slain when the body is slain. Okay, now I have a question for you. And you can use the Q&A to provide me with an answer instead of a question. So here's my question to you. Does the teaching that the person within the body is not killed when the body is killed encourage indifference to suffering or death? Does this give us a reason to just not care that people are dying or suffering? Can we be cavalier about engaging in warfare? Is this what Krishna is trying to convince Arjuna of? That, come on, man, it's just no big deal. You can kill him. Please share your thoughts with me on this. If you want, okay, so I got an emphatic no from Bonnie, but Bonnie, now you have to tell me why. And anyone else who has an idea, why this would be the case. I would welcome your opinion. Give it some thought. You can hang with this if you ask. Okay, Donna. It seems like that way would further, looks like you hit your enter key before you finished your thought. So I'm going to wait until I see the rest of what you got in your mind. Okay. So their time on earth to learn and be kind and loving is artificially shortened because of another human. Okay. That's true. That might be one of Arjuna's counter-arguments. You know, how can I interfere with their allotted time on earth? Who am I to interrupt the karma of a person in this life and give them an opportunity to perhaps see the error of their ways in the case of the opposing army? All right. It seems Donna is back, and it seems like indifference to the physical body is being encouraged. Okay. And that's the question, you know, the ethical question that we need to consider here. Become less self-focused. And elaborate on that a little bit, please. I want to know more about what you mean by this and what the implications are. So, Bonnie, the connection with the soul is temporarily lost, plus it is not one's place to make judgment on another's soul and action. All right. This is the main ethical conundrum in the Bhagavad-gita. This idea that spiritual life, a transcendental philosophy, gives one license to be indifferent to the suffering of others, to take a life without having to worry about the fact that the person actually dies. This kind of thinking extends out to an absence of environmental consciousness. If you think the earth and the world is just a big illusion, then it doesn't matter if you pollute it, it doesn't matter if you trash it. Now, in this particular case, Arjuna is being encouraged to fight not just on the principle that it doesn't matter because no one really dies, just the body dies. He's being encouraged to fight on the basis of righteous principle. Star Wars was created in part to make a case for just war, that there is such a thing as a good reason to wage war if it is defensive, if it is meant for protection, if it is meant to push back against the encroachment of evil on society. So in this particular case, the first argument that Krishna is making is that Arjuna isn't understanding the first principle of reality. And what he's working on is not just a rationalization for violence, but he's working on Arjuna's resistance to fighting due to attachment to his family members on the basis of his bodily connection with them. From the standpoint of principle, Arjuna is fighting a defensive battle against people who have used every trick in the book to try to assassinate his family and steal the kingdom from his family. And these people are clearly operating on an unrighteous path. So it's Arjuna's duty to stand up for righteousness in the same way that it's all of our duties to stand up and do something when we see that evil is afoot and people are being harmed, unless we take action. Okay. So, anonymous. This is a comment as much as a question, if it's a question. Like most spiritual scriptures, much of this is to be interpreted as symbolic. Krishna is speaking of the many egoic personas that live within. These must die. What doesn't die is the consciousness, the soul. So Arjuna is being encouraged to kill those demons that live within the human mind. The demons, in essence, are his, quote, family, the attachments. Now, that's one way to understand this text, and many people have taken this approach, this idea of allegory or metaphor, symbolic meaning. And that symbolic meaning is valuable. It has valuable because we want to put ourselves in Arjuna's position. Arjuna is our role model. We want to take Arjuna's position, follow in his footsteps, in order to come to the same, ultimately to the same realization that Arjuna will have. So we're basically tracing Arjuna's path of transformation as we go on a hero's journey with him through the Bhagavad-gita. Last week, we also spoke a little bit about this idea of symbolic and literal meaning. My feeling about this is that both are necessary. That if we only take the literal meaning, then we miss out on our own opportunity for personal transformation. We're really just hearing about someone else's, and who knows what kind of stuff we can rationalize when we don't really apply the meaning to ourselves. On the other hand, if we only take a symbolic approach, then we also miss out on teachings that are found in the Bhagavad-gita that are self-evident, which is to say that the meaning is just clear in the verse without any necessity of reading anything into it or speculating about its possible meaning. So on the one hand, I agree with Anonymous in terms of the importance of understanding the metaphorical or symbolic meaning of the text as we can apply it to ourselves. However, I also think that there is value in a literal understanding of the text and an illumination of what that literal text means from someone who has insight into it, when the text has mystery to it, has something that requires elaboration and unpacking. And in those instances where the meaning of the text is self-evident, then accepting that it actually means precisely what it says is important. Okay. The invincible Atman. So one reason that Krishna is using these particular examples, can't be cut by a weapon, burned by fire, can't be drowned, can't be withered by the wind. Well, on the battlefield, these are actual weapons. Arjuna has his bow and his arrow, but he also has mantras, and he can shoot arrows that contain fire weapons, and you counteract a fire weapon with a rain weapon, and you can throw a hurricane at somebody. the description in the Mahabharata of the different kinds of mantra weapons that these soldiers who are really, really skilled at such things can throw at one another includes these kinds of things. And as I said earlier, there's this idea, it can sound in this section as if Krishna is speaking about the self is everywhere and immeasurable. And one might take that to mean that the self is one self in all places at all times. And that's actually one of the dangers of a strictly metaphorical understanding of the Gita, is that one might come to such a conclusion. However, Krishna also says that consciousness is indivisible. And I'm conscious and you're conscious, and our consciousness can't be divided up. And there can't be one consciousness that got split into pieces, because consciousness by its definition, according to Krishna, is indivisible. So the idea that Krishna is talking about an undifferentiated oneness of being as being the self to whom he refers is actually not supported in this text by virtue of the fact that he's already established our individuality and his own individuality, and the idea that consciousness itself is indivisible. Okay. In verse 224, Sarvagata means all-pervading, present everywhere, implies life forms beyond our definition of biological life. You know, when we go looking for extraterrestrial life, what we're looking for is life as we know it, which means biological life. You know, carbon-based life forms. And so if living beings are present everywhere, then they may be living in places where we think nothing can live, because we define life according to our own biology. According to the Bhagavad-gita, just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. Then 226, okay? In this particular verse where he says, if on the other hand you believe that souls are ever being born and at the time of death forever cease to be, you still have no cause for lamentation. So this idea is our modern paradigm. We think we come into being, stay for some time, go out of being. We are surrounded by an infinitude of nothingness, of non-existence, on either side of our very short lifespan. And here, since we're seeing it in the Bhagavad-gita, it's clearly not a particularly modern idea. Krishna actually thought of this when he spoke the Bhagavad-gita such a long time ago. If this were the case, that we simply come into being for a very short time and then go out of being forever, then our existence would have no objective significance. And Krishna is saying actually just the opposite, that we are extremely significant. In fact, he speaks the Bhagavad-gita precisely because he thinks we're valuable, that we're significant, and that he wants us to know what he's telling us here. We'd also have the issue of there would be no objective morality. There would be no sense of ethical imperative based on any absolute truth. So even though people may have some issue with the ethical conundrums of the Bhagavad-gita insofar as violence and warfare is concerned, if you take the opposite approach, the modern paradigm of temporary existence, then you also have no objective morality. Now morality just becomes your subjective idea, and one person's food is another man's poison. It also calls the very validity of our experience of being into question. Is consciousness just an epiphenomenon, a side effect of a chance combination of material elements, like the foam that rises up in a glass when you pour root beer into it that actually has no substance? Does that even really count as existence? According to the Bhagavad-gita, no. That which truly is said to exist endures. And that which has no existence per se is that which comes and goes. Now you see it, now you don't. I like root beer, but I don't think I'm the equivalent of foam in the top of the glass. Okay. So now I have another question for you. How is this empowering? How does this work? How does this make a difference in our lives? If you actually experienced yourself as an eternal spiritual being, if your existence didn't depend on having this body made of matter, if you actually experienced yourself that way, how would that change your life? What would be different for you if you actually experienced yourself as an eternal spiritual being? Please think about this for a moment and offer your thoughts in the Q&A box. I ask this question on a regular basis when I'm teaching yoga philosophy in yoga classes, and there's a portion of my book that deals with this issue, and I ask readers to also think about this idea. And I have a few answers to this question that people have been kind enough to offer. I would like to hear yours. Consider the question in this way. How stressed out would you be about things? All right, Donna, living your life with deep compassion for yourself and other selves. Well, now I know you. I think that's how you live now. Sue, you're very fortunate. It's very, very fortunate to get a glimpse of our spiritual nature. What else? Jill, you spend more time in a place of loving kindness and less focus on the rat race. Yeah. Why do we work? Well, because we need money. Why do we need money? Because we need to pay for food and housing. Why do we need food and housing? Well, because if we didn't have them, we'd die. We'd starve. We'd be exposed to the elements. But if we experienced ourselves as eternal spiritual beings, completely independently of the body, well, do we need those things anymore? Maybe not so much. Here's some other answers that I've heard. Letting go of things that we obsess over. Bonnie, no fear of dying. Yes, if you know that you're not this body and it's only the body that dies, you become fearless. You can move through the world fearlessly. And I think that's one of the biggest advantages of being an eternal spirit soul. It takes away all fear. Fear of death, or the death of the body, clinging to life, is one of the 5 obstacles to yoga listed in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Ignorance, ego, attachment, aversion, and clinging to life. So yeah, you become fearless. Do you think you might be able to look at others differently? If you experience yourself as an eternal spirit soul, do you think that might make it easier to experience others as a spirit soul as well. Think about that for a moment. Who would you most like to help have this same realization? Is there anyone in particular that you would be interested in giving this same realization to if you were experiencing yourself this way? What would this do to your ego? Or if you have one, your sense of vanity? How much would those things matter? So freedom from anxiety. Immediately, because all the things that we're anxious about, if we think about it, are associated with this body and with this mind. It would make unconditional love a lot easier. And yeah, I think it would. It would also make us more patient. A lot of our anxiety is all about the race against time, and time is actually always winning this race. But if we are beyond the influence of time, what's the hurry? It gives us an ability to serve others on a whole other level. Because when you're free from anxiety associated with identifying with the body, and when you know the time is actually on your side, then you have that ability. And it also allows you to be genuinely equipoised in happiness and distress, reflecting back on what we spoke about last week. The idea that this is not something artificial, that it's actually authentic when you have some sense of spiritual experience. Okay. Heading into the home stretch, we just have a few minutes left. Tonight's program has been Chapter 2, verses 16 through 30, Discernment, Invincibility, and Empowerment. Now, one last thing about empowerment. If this is how you would be if you actually experience yourself as a spirit soul, then why not act that way right now? Realization is applied knowledge. So if you accept this knowledge offered by Krishna in the Bhagavad-gita, and you act on the basis of this knowledge, if you say, okay, I accept that this is true, and you act in that way, then the realization, the experience, actually comes. So that is your homework. Try it. Take it for a test drive. Act as if you were a spiritual being, eternal, invincible. See what happens. And yeah, this is why the ancients concentrated so much on not identifying with the body. All right. If you have any questions, as we are running out of time, please send them to me, Hari@Hari-kirtana.com. I enjoy corresponding with you all. Some of you have been kind enough to send me some questions, and I look very forward to answering those questions. Some other resources for you, please visit my website if you have not already done so to get my free 45-minute class. Angelique, you're welcome. Donna, you're very welcome. My book is also available on Amazon and also through your local bookstore if you go to indiebound.com. Coming events, if you are going to be down in the Richmond area, or if you live in the Richmond area, or if you're moving to Richmond in the next few days, then come and see me. I'm going to be speaking about Ancient Wisdom for Modern Life, its practical application, on April 28th. That'll be a nice long afternoon, 12:30 to 6:30 at Project Yoga Richmond. You can get the details at projectyoga.org/training. So if you're anywhere near there, please come and see me. And that would be great. Also, if you are anywhere on planet Earth and would like to spend some time in Silver Spring, Maryland, I will be offering an advanced yoga teacher training program with Ashley Lateki Ellen Bass at Skyhouse Yoga. And you can go to my website to get complete information under Work With Me Teacher Training. Next week, we'll talk a little bit more about ethics and warfare, because Krishna is now going to pivot to an argument that's very specific to he's got to fight, not just the philosophical understanding, but the specifics that this is his duty. So we're going to talk about chest pounder versus rainbow unicorn. What happens when women read the Bhagavad-gita and it's just a bunch of guys pounding their chests and acting like guys? Do slain warriors go to heaven? We'll speak a little bit about duty and honor and where we find that in contemporary society as well as in ancient society. This will be Bhagavad Gita verses 31 through 38. Thank you very, very much, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.